What's going on, guys? It's Cimoooooooo. So today I'm bringing to you a video on how to beat Danger Dark World FTK. With this deck looking to be the strongest deck of the current format, at least for the foreseeable future until we get like a new ban list, which hopefully is going to be after YCS Pasadena, this is something you're definitely going to want to watch because since this deck is so incredibly powerful, it's so oppressive, it's so degenerate, and there's so few ways to actually deal with it, you're going to want to know as many ways as possible to pretty much hedge your chances that you're not going to just get completely obliterated if you go to your locals, regionals, or even a YCS. So before we get into it, if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell so you don't miss a single upload. And if you really enjoy the content that I produce on this channel, then consider backing me on Patreon or becoming a YouTube channel member. We have a very special shout out to give today, and that is going to Farfa. If you don't know, he's another YouTube content creator as well for the Yu-Gi-Oh! Trading card game. Tons of memes, tons of fun, and a good friend of mine as well. So be sure to check out his channel, and thank you so much for the support. And if you're interested in supporting the channel yourself, hit the join button down below or check out the links in the description. But without further ado, let's go ahead and get right into it. So, basically when it comes down to this deck, there's a couple things we have to talk about in terms of how it functions before we discuss how we can handle it. Because when it comes to the FTK, well, yes, it is an FTK, there's certain things about it that just make it so incredibly powerful, especially compared to other FTKs that are much easier to stop by comparison. First and foremost is the fact that you're doing a simple Grapha loop in order to use Cannon Soldier to burn your opponent for all the damage on their life points. So you're summoning out a Grapha, you're basically tributing off with Cannon Soldier next to a Firewall Dragon. That's going to allow you to special summon a Dark World from your hand. You bounce the Dark World back, summon Grapha back, continue the loop from there until your opponent is dead. So one of the ways we could, in theory, stop the loop is if we can kind of hit their Grapha, right? Because if they only play one Grapha, which most of the variants do, by hitting Grapha and stopping the loop from going off, they're not going to be able to FTK you since that's where a majority of the damage does come from. So something like DD Crow could, in theory, sound like a good idea, right? Because if you banish Grapha, they no longer have the Dark World loop, and then they could maybe summon a bunch of dangers if they get really lucky, and Cannon Soldier might be able to tribute enough of them off. But honestly, that doesn't really work too well because when it comes to DD Crow, as well as all these other hand traps like Ash Blossom, Ghost Ogre, Ghost Bell, the biggest problem is Outer Entity AZATHOT. Now, when Outer Entity AZATHOT is succeeds summoned to the board, your opponent cannot activate monster effects for the rest of the turn. Now, this may sound really powerful, and that's because it is, but there's even more to it than that. The thing is, as soon as AZATHOT is Xyz summoned, as soon as the summon is successful, the effect is a continuous permanent effect for the rest of the turn, which means it can't be negated, so something like, I don't know, like Effect Veiler or like Impermanence doesn't do anything to it because the effect is permanently set. That also applies if AZATHOT leaves the field, so even if they link off with it or do anything else with it, you're still not going to be able to use any hand traps because AZATHOT's effect is being applied. So that's insane that basically not only does this deck have an FTK, but it has essentially the ability to use 2 level 4s to go into an AZATHOT to prevent you from using any of your hand traps. And as soon as that AZATHOT hits the board, it's probably game over because if you even had a hand trap, then now you just lost all hope of even being able to use it to stop your opponent, so it's not really going to do you any good. Now, that basically means that we have to look for hand traps that we can use before AZATHOT hits the board, one of which is Droll and Lockbird. Droll and Lockbird is probably the strongest chance you're going to have against this deck because since the deck does so much drawing, Droll is able to essentially be used to stop your opponent from adding cards to their hand. And since the deck just digs through so many different cards with the dangers, with the Lure of Darkness, beginning at the end, it's very easy to trigger a card like Droll and Lockbird. So by doing so, they're not going to be able to filter through their deck, they're not going to be able to assemble the right combo pieces, and they're not going to FTK you. I think it's still maybe possible for them to maybe do it, but I think the chances are so low that if their hand was that good, they were probably just going to win that game anyway. So, but Droll, for the most part, I would say 99% of the time is going to be enough to shut down their turn, which means you have a chance to then establish and then hopefully have some sort of way to come back against the FTK. Another way that you could stop this, though, is Ghost Reaper and Winter Cherries. Now, Cherries is good because if they're going first, they're going to have a monster on the board, presumably, especially if they want to FTK you, so you can go ahead and use Reaper to hit something like Firewall Dragon. Without Firewall Dragon, they're not going to be able to do the loop because they essentially lose their enable to continuously summon out Dark Worlds to keep feeding Grapha, so by doing so, you're going to cut off the ability for them to FTK you, and that's pretty damn good. Now, Ghost Reaper and Droll could in theory lose to something like Called by the Grave, but since this deck is so combo-centric, and because of the dangers, you actually don't want to draw cards that aren't combo pieces, at the current moment, none of the builds are playing Called by the Grave, so that's something you don't have to worry about. But again, if your opponent is able to summon something like AZATHOT before you're able to use Droll or Reaper, it's not going to matter. So the nice thing is, we're able to use both of these hand traps before AZATHOT hits the board, and that hopefully should give us a chance to assemble our own board and be able to stop them on their next turn, or OTK them and just win the match. Obviously, that's best case scenario. Now, there are some other cards I want to talk about, and these are cards that are more tailored towards going first if you happen to win the die roll, because while the deck is so strong going first, because obviously it's an FTK deck, going second, it's just as powerful because not only does it still have the FTK built in, so if it's able to kind of bait out all of your negation with stuff like, you know, Bigfoot and Thunderbird, which is very possible, those are pretty good going second cards, they could theoretically FTK you in main phase 2, and you're still going to lose the game anyway. But the other way that the deck wins is that they just summon a shitload of danger monsters to the field, and look at the attack value on some of these larger ones. I mean, it's pretty substantial, and you can do things like continuously linking off the danger monsters to really just overwhelm your opponent, and that's honestly another way that the deck wins. A majority of the players that were piloting this deck at YCS London were saying that they didn't even win that many die rolls, but what ended up happening was they would just OTK their opponent going second because the danger cards are so powerful in a going second environment as well. So how do we stop them going second? Well, basically, since all of these monsters have activated effects, Inspector Border is looking pretty damn good because the Spectre Border prevents all activated effects from pretty much working. So since that's the case, they really have no card in their deck that can kind of out this, at least for game 1. When games 2 and 3 come around and you get the side deck involved, they might have cards to be able to stop it like Forbidden Chalice, but Inspector Border, honestly, if they don't have the out, it's still looking very solid. I mean, they have no way to summon a danger monster. Their best normal summon is something like Armageddon Knight or like Zephyros, and if they can't get to like anything that can run it over, Inspector Border could just honestly win you the game outright. But then you also have Majesty's Fiend, Inspector Border's big brother. Depending on the deck that you're playing, maybe you're playing something like Burning Abyss, and you can easily special summon a monster out onto the field, tributed for Majesty's Fiend. Majesty's Fiend's a lot better because, you know, in the instance of, you know, let's say they manage to get 2 monsters on the board, maybe they can link and then they have an effect they could theoretically activate, but Majesty's Fiend denies all effect activations, so, and not to mention it's 2400, so it's a little bit bigger to get over, and I think that's a pretty good means of being able to stop them. Again, games 2 and 3, the side deck might get involved, but at that point, they might have as just of a high of chance of getting that card as you do of getting Majesty's Fiend, so just something to keep in mind. But then we also have a couple of cards that may sound a little bit ridiculous, but depending on the severity of how much the Danger Dark World FTK takes off in the coming weeks, you might actually want to consider possibly in the side deck. Now, these cards are a little bit ridiculous, and they're kind of the cards I would least recommend out of everything on this list, but those cards are Hanewada and Curry Photon. So Hanewada has a quick effect where you discard it and take no effect damage for the turn, so very similar to Droll, Knockbird, or Ghost Reaper. You can use it before AZATHOT hits the field, which means you can't get you can't get FTK'd because you can't take any effect damage, so basically they're not really going to be able to do anything, and they kind of just have to pass their turn. They might be able to Gumblar you, I mean, maybe for a couple of cards, but the deck isn't really designed to do that. That's kind of like an alternate win condition, but even then, the fact that you didn't lose outright is good for something. And then Curry Photon is kind of very similar to Hanewada, except it serves a different role. So you have to pay 2,000 life points, but you take no damage for the turn. So it does have a cost, but the trade-off is, with Curry Photon, you don't take any damage, not just effect damage. So let's say you might get OTK'd by the Danger Dark World deck because they just summon like a ton of big monsters and they're just going in. If you drop Curry Photon, you're not going to take battle damage either. So it kind of just acts as this 1 day of peace type effect. And yeah, sure, it may cost you 2,000 life points. and that could be rather steep depending on the circumstances, it's kind of guaranteeing you're going to at least see another turn, and that also means you can't get FTK'd in something like main phase 2. So both of these cards have their trade-offs, and again, it can be used prior to AZATHOT hitting the board, so again, very important. These are two cards that I would kind of recommend the least out of everything else I've already mentioned on here, just because they're so narrow in their application. I mean, if you look at stuff like Droll and Lockbird and Ghost Reaper, you can use Droll and Lock and Reaper in other matchups. I mean, Droll against Sky Striker, it's not like the best, but I mean, at least you're gonna buy yourself a turn. There's a ton of decks that do searching anyway, so Droll at least has some overlap. Against Reaper, I mean, you can hit decks like Goki, you can even hit Sky Striker with Reaper if you really want to, you can hit Thunder Dragons, like, there's a lot of good matchups there. And then Inspector Border is kind of the same way. Inspector Border is amazing against Altergeist, it's amazing against Trickstar, it's actually not too bad against Thunder Dragon either. So the other cards on this list do have some overlap, and that's why I favor them much more than something like, say, Hanawada or Curry Photon, but maybe depending on your budget or depending on what you see makes the most sense, and I guess it depends on how just completely just dominant this deck becomes in the coming weeks. That's going to help you decide what makes the most sense for you. But guys, that's gonna do it for the video. Let me know down in the comments what you guys think about your favorite ways to stop the Danger Dark World FTK. I'd really love to hear your thoughts. So guys, thank you so much for watching the video. Be sure to like the video as always, subscribe to the channel for more amazing Yu-Gi-Oh content, and if you found this video informative, then consider backing me on Patreon or becoming a YouTube channel member, because just by showing your support in any way that you can, you're investing in my ability to continue bringing you amazing Yu-Gi-Oh content. So thanks so much again, and we'll see you next time.